Welcome to the Fantasy Football School by the Tartan Touchdown. I am your host, Brian, and I am here tonight to talk to you about everything to do with fantasy football for a complete beginner's guide. Now, there's only one person I could have on to talk fantasy football with me, and he is my Canadian compatriot, Stu. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you, Brian?
I'm very well. Delighted to get a chance to get on and talk fantasy. This is a subject that's very close to my heart. This is the podcast that I needed when I started getting involved with the NFL. This is a story that some people that know me know, people who don't know me, so everybody listening, you can enjoy, because my introduction to the NFL was a random message by a good shared friend of mine and Stuart's, who told me that they needed an extra person to fill out their fantasy football league. To which I said, I have no idea what the NFL is. Is that the one with the egg-shaped ball? Which could have been rugby, it could have been anything. And from there, I was then promised a weekend away. That was a weekend away for a draft that I was promised, and that got me in. And from then, the rest, as they say, is history, because I have been captivated by this incredible sport and this incredible game. Now, Stu, you've been doing fantasy or you've been doing the NFL, certainly, right, and fantasy alongside it, a lot longer than I have. See, before we dive into our primer of all things fantasy football, what's your kind of earlier, what was your introduction to the world of NFL fantasy?
I guess, for fantasy, to be honest, like NFL fantasy, I've only actually been playing it for maybe, I want to say, like 4 years before you, so not actually that long, but 4 years in fantasy is eternity. And
for context, for all of our dear listeners, I've been doing it for about 6 years now, so that's near enough a decade.
So a quarter of my life I've been playing NFL fantasy. That's why I'm so grey now.
Yeah. So do you know that actually that's why I'm so grey now? It takes us on to the first point. Is what is fantasy football? It is something that makes you go prematurely grey. If you have shares in any makeup companies, anti-aging serums and all the rest of it, you are welcome, because we have been inflating your profit margin the entire time we've been playing fantasy football, because it is a hobby, it is an activity that brings a bizarre amount of stress with it. Here is, how can I be really, really upset or really delighted about a made-up sports team on a weekly basis? And you're like, why are you so upset on a Monday? My fantasy team lost. A made-up team? Yes, they may be made up, but they're real in my heart. And they will always be real in my heart.
Is there anything worse than when your real-life team loses and your fantasy team is absolutely devastated in the same weekend? That's the worst feeling of all.
That is absolutely devastating when that happens, and there's very little worse, actually, than your fantasy team.
As a Browns fan...
Well, no, we don't talk about them. We don't talk about them. We don't talk about the Browns, because, that's just a source of upset. The factory of sadness is live, and fantasy is the only thing that stands a chance of bringing me joy, because I can actually win championships, unlike my beloved Browns. So, thanks, Stu. You've just put me in an absolute downer by talking about Cleveland within the first 3 minutes.
I can't really talk as I'm sitting here in my Bengals jersey as well, because we may win games, but we don't really win championships.
That is true. So, do you know what I suppose for the what is fantasy football? Really simply, to give people the facts and figures they actually. So, fantasy football is a game that you play against your friends, and you draft a group of NFL players, and then you watch them perform, and depending on what they do, make passes, score touchdowns, they will get points for you. And you'll be competing against one of your friends in a head-to-head, and whoever gets the most points wins. And then when you win, you gloat, and you make everyone in the league aware of how incredibly you are a savant. You're the greatest manager, and you know more about the world of football than anyone ever has. And on the occasions you lose, it was a fluke, and it will never happen again.
Yeah, I That's always my excuse.
It's always that. It's never my fault.
This guy tweaked his hamstring, so that's why he only got me 5 points this week. Or if his hands weren't playing it.
That's it. That's it. There's always, yes, fantasy football is something that, yes, it can make your friends much, much closer as you share the bonds of a fantasy league. It will also give you such an incredible relationship with certain players who will become your fantasy darling, whether they play for your team or not, or your fantasy villain, whether they play for your team or not. Yeah. Yes, I do mean you, Jarvis Landry, and 3 yards of reception, every reception. I do love Jarvis Landry. Right. Going to move us on. We're going to get going. So, what I wanted to start off with talking about tonight, the first thing that I thought in terms of, if you're thinking about getting in to fantasy football, what is one of the first questions you're going to have? Well, one of the first things that came to my mind when I thought about this is, what kind of league are you going to play in? Fantasy football is something where you've got your group of friends together. You've all agreed that fantasy football is something you want to do. You then need to decide, what is the actual structure of your league going to be? Now, there's 3 types of league out there. Well, there's 3 main types of league out there. There are all sorts of funky league rules that you can have. Like, we're not talking about this, but I don't know if you've ever heard of a vampire league, Stu. It's weird.
I've not played Vampire League yet. That's
odd. Yeah. That's something everybody can enjoy as they're listening, is that the fantasy rabbit holes are real, and you enjoy disappearing down them alongside us. But there are 3 main types of league that you can expect to come across as you enter the hobby that is fantasy football. These are redraft leagues, keeper leagues, and dynasty leagues. And what we're going to do, we're going to have a wee look at what each of these are, talk about the main differences between them. So, Stu, before we do, right, and this is a bit cheeky, because me and Stu have got the same answer to this question. Of the 3, before we explain what they are, so that the listeners of yours know where our biases lie, what's your favourite? If we had to choose, are you doing redraft? Are you doing keeper? Are you doing dynasty? What's the number 1 in your heart?
Number 1 in my heart, like without a doubt, is dynasty. Because I love the long-term game planning and the fact that we'll go into what dynasty is eventually, but I just like that, like, more complex long-term planning over years rather than just that one season. But I will say, dynasty is probably not the best place for rookies or new folks to the NFL to start, because if you get that initial draft wrong, you're in for a world of hurt for years. Where do you try and see these guys? Well,
and that's where me and Stu have played this game before. Yeah. And it sets us up quite nicely to start with the league that you should start in. Yes. If you are new to Dynasty, if you are new to this, redraft leagues are the leagues to be kicking yourself off with. Now, what is a redraft league? Well, in a nutshell, it's a league that you redo every single year. This is how the majority of fantasy leagues work. So your season starts, you're going to be playing against your league mates, you're going to be playing against your friends, and you're doing it all through the year. You'll have drafted players, you go through the playoffs, and someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. Always a loser. We love the winners, we love the losers as well.
Technically,
that's it.
Technically 11 to 15 losers, depending on the size of your league.
Now, this is true, and we could go down the second place is just first loser, but there's a loser and there's a loser.
Yeah.
Because there is a difference between coming second and coming 12th. They are not the same. But once you have that, once you have your winners, you have your losers, the season is ended, you get to enjoy the postseason and real NFL and the Super Bowl, you start again. You have a new league the year after. There, other than I won last year, there's no baggage that comes with it. All of the players that you had on your team, we're going to talk about types of players that you would have in your roster throughout the episode. They all go back into the pot. They all go back into the mix, and then you get to pick a whole new team all over again. And it's one of the things that, for me, I do love a Dynasty League. We're going to talk about them in a minute. But it's one of the things that makes redraft special, because you get that chance every single year to go, let's do that again. let's learn from our mistakes, or, as is much more likely to be the habit, let's refuse to learn from that mistake and make it in a whole new and interesting way. It is the thing, Stu, I don't know if you share this, it's the thing for me that does make redraft special, that you get to continually try it again, and you don't feel like you're behind anyone at the start of the year. Week 1 rolls around in redraft and everyone's a champion.
Yeah, because, well, everyone comes out of their respective draft feeling, because obviously once you've picked your players, you're like, I made the best possible decision I could possibly make in every single one of the rounds, so you're going to have utmost faith in your team. We should maybe actually just hold up slightly here before we talk any further, Brian, just to even explain quickly what a draft actually is, because I think some people, especially if they're rookies and coming from Scotland, the UK, we're not really used to what drafts are. Like, whereas in North America, all sports live and die by the draft. Like, that's where teams get their new players. They don't buy them from other teams. They don't, they can get them from free agency as well, but that's where, your young, good talent is coming from. They're drafted. So I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about what.
Yeah, we are going to cover drafts and a little bit about the strategy a little later in the episode. But in terms of this for redraft, when we're talking about your redraft draft, and this shares the same with the next two league types are keeper and dynasty, and it's the same in a keeper draft, and it's the same in, and we'll talk about this in a minute, a dynasty startup draft. Principle's super simple. Every single player in the league is there for you to pick. And you can pick anybody, and that they will then enter your roster, and that then means that they are on your team, and no one else can pick them. So almost a great point for the listeners out there that are maybe used to soccer fantasy. So, if you play a Premier League soccer fantasy league, where a lot of them work is lots of people can pick the same players, and you work on maybe a budget as opposed to a draft. But with NFL fantasy, if you've got a player drafted, then they are your player. No one else can grab them. And it's about that idea that in redraft, you can grab them 1 year and you can be elated at the performance they gave you all year, or you can be devastatingly upset with them. And then next year, you get to pick and choose whether you want to make that mistake again, or if you want to try and reach for that player again and hope that lightning will strike twice. And it's what makes it really, really fascinating.
Once you've been burned by J.K. Dobbins, right, or me blowing up, you'll draft him continually each year if you're me, because it falls further down the ADP list. But not to get into the specifics too much right now, but
we'll talk about ADP later. This is something for everybody listening you will do. And say everyone has a fantasy, darling, that you understand them. You can fix them. You can make them right again. If only they would. I don't. There's so many. There's so many. Right. On your next type of league. Now, this is a keeper league, and a keeper league is actually neatly positioned in the middle because it's kind of halfway between redraft and the dynasty league. So a keeper league works more or less identically to a redraft league. Every year you're going to have a draft. Every player-ish is going to be in that draft. The ish is the important bit, though. So what happens is that after the first year of your league's happened, you have a team with all of these players in it. Some of them you love and some of them you loathe. And you get to select a set number. Your league agrees. It's not like I can sit here and say there's one keeper. Depending on how your league works, you might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And you then say, no. They're mine. They're not yours. You don't get to try and take them. They belong to my team. And no one else can draft them next year. But, as with the best things in life, it comes at a cost. Now, the cost changes a wee bit for league to league again. But a super common way for leagues to do this is to say, right, that player is going to cost you the draft pick of the round you got them last year, +1. So, if you drafted a player in the 5th round 1 year, and you wanted to keep them, it would mean in the next year, you would get that player, but you wouldn't get to pick someone in the 4th round. It would have cost you that pick. And then you need to do the maths, and you need to sit and think, how worth it are they? Are they going to be better than all the players that everyone else is taking there? Or are they too expensive, and I should put them back in the bucket, and everyone else gets to pick from them? Keeper leagues are a bit funky. Keeper leagues are something that I don't have huge amounts of experience with keeper leagues. I don't play them. Massive. I play one or two.
That's one I'm definitely getting better at, because I have a long-term keeper league that I've been in, and it's a super flex as well, which also makes it a little bit more funky.
What about super flex in a minute?
Yeah, we'll get there in a minute, but it's taken me a little bit to really. I'm a Bengals fan, so I drafted Joe Burrow. Luckily, I got him in the 4th round the first year, but I realised after my first few years of not doing very well because I kept prioritising picks to keep Joe Burrow, so I lost my 3rd pick the next year, and then year 3 I lost my 2nd round pick, and I went, you know what, no, it's probably not worth spending the 1st round pick on him the next year, because there's going to be such good players available like in the 1st round that maybe it would be better to let that drop. And since I've started doing that, I have, last year I made the final, although I didn't win, but I'm on the trend up, whereas the first 2 years I was missing the playoffs as I was learning how the scoring worked in the league. But it does help when I have also at the same time, I've been dragging Jalen Waddle along with my team for the past few years, because I drafted him in the 13th round the first time we did it, so it's been an easy, like, well,
a little bit more economy to be had there.
Yeah, even when he has a bad year, like, I'm still like, well, he only cost me an 11th round pick, say, so I'm like, just keep on going.
Right.
He was healthy this year, it'll all be good.
Well, definitely healthy. Everyone, this is one of those great bits. I don't have this sectioned into the show, but everyone knows the number one rule in fantasy is that everyone you pick for your team is guaranteed to be healthy for all 17 games. Every game they will be fit, they'll be healthy, they'll play, they won't get hurt, ever. Possibly. Can't happen. Not to my players. Right. Moving on. Before I get carried away with my own personal hopes and dreams. Last type of league you might find yourself in is, as me and Stu alluded to earlier, it's our favourite type of league. It's called a dynasty league. And what this is where you don't repick everyone every single year. And it's very like the NFL in that regard. Now, the first year you do it, it's going to be like redraft. Everyone's in the bucket, and you get to pick whoever you want. But that team is now yours forever. It is yours until the league explodes. What that then means is that the players you have stay on your team until you trade them. Again, lots of things coming later on this pod. Until you trade them, we'll talk about that later, or until you cut them. And you are the GM of this team. You are there for the long haul. Mm-hmm. You also have, because you're the GM, a shiny new toy to play with. And it's Stu's favourite toy. You have draft picks. Because in your future years, we're not putting everyone back in the bucket like redraft or keeper leagues. The only drafts we're going to have after year one, rookies only. Just like the NFL. So, you're going to have rookies. Most dynasty leagues will do their rookie draft after the NFL's rookie draft. Stu loves the idea of doing a rookie draft before the actual players have been drafted, and you just need to watch lots of college ball.
Yeah, I'm a bit of an animal, like it turns out, because I kind of like the lottery of going, okay, you know what, I've identified this wide receiver as a guy that could really succeed in the NFL, and then you hope that he's going to land on a team that his wide receiver.
Hope he doesn't get drafted by the Browns.
Yeah, or you also hope, like, for instance, you hope maybe, like with Booker from this year's draft, going to Tampa, great wide receiver, looks absolutely solid. However, he's going up against Mike Evans, Godwin, and and a few of the other kind of players players there that they have in Tampa. But they are a pass-heavy offense, so it might work out.
Who knows?
But for me, I was like, I wish he'd landed with the Chargers, say, who have a good quarterback, but not many receiving options. So I would like to play that lottery of trying to identify things and go forward. But I get it. Like, most people don't want to do that. You want to have the certainty.
I want to know what team they're on. I want to know wide receivers. Kind of want to know who the quarterback is.
Yeah,
it's just a little bit of info we like.
Yeah.
Now, the last bit on league types, the last bit about dynasty leagues is, and we are not. This is something that I am referencing, but it is something that we may well cover in a future pod episode because, my God, it's a topic all for itself.
Yeah.
draft strategy in both your startup dynasty draft and rookie drafts because you have picks to play with. So you might have a team that is full of absolute studs. You came second in the league last year. You missed that title by the narrowest of 1 point, half a point. You're all in. You're a winner. So you maybe don't care all that much about rookies. You want proven talent, even if it's a bit older and it's about to retire. Or maybe you came 12th and maybe you did not have a good year. In which case you maybe want to trade away some of your talented pieces for picks because you ain't winning no championship soon and you want to build a team for the future. Now, this is something dynasty trades and dynasty draft tactics is a future pod episode for us to talk about. And if that is something that you are interested in, please like and subscribe and everything to the pod because it's the kind of thing that we hope we'll cover down the road. But for sticking with a bit of a beginner's spin to today's episode, we'll maybe leave that there. Now, one of the bits in Stu, I'm going to be giving you a big in a minute, and I'm going to be giving you a soapbox to stand on. I'm going to talk about scoring, because you've picked these players. We're going to talk about the types of players you pick later on. You've picked some players, and they're going to go out there, and I promised points. How do you get points? Well, there are realistically three main methods, or three main ways that the scoring is measured. You have standard scoring. You have got something called 0.5 PPR, and it stands for points per reception. And you have got PPR, or point per reception. Now, standard scoring is the OG, where it started. And it is pretty simple. You don't get any points for catching a pass or carrying out a rush at all. You get points come from 1 out of 4 and a bit places. Passing. You will get a set number of points for every 25 yards that your quarterback throws the ball. You will get a number of points for every TD that they throw. And you'll lose a couple of points if they chuck a pick. Your rushers, you'll get some points for every yard that they rush, every touchdown they score, and if they get butterfingers and drop the ball, you will lose some points. Your receivers, be they running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, whomever, they will get points for every yard that they run while they hold the ball. They'll get points for every touchdown, and they'll lose points for fumbles as well. Yes, the kickers can also score points for field goals and extra points, and defenses can score points for sacking the quarterback, getting receptions and fumbles and defensive touchdowns and all of these things. And there's lots of things we could talk about with DS. But that's standard scoring in a nutshell. One of the big issues that standard scoring tends to have is that in your fantasy league, a quarterback in a standard scoring league is the most important person. He will churn out so many more points than every other position group that it gets a bit nutty at times. And this is where Stuart, 0.5 and full point PPR comes in. Because at the end of the day, these leagues, well, you tell me, what is the whole point of introducing a half point or a point for a reception? What is that meant to try and do?
What it's meant to do is kind of minimising that gap from the top quarterbacks to, like the other position groups. So you're not sitting because, when you're in standard scoring, if you have, let's say, Lamar Jackson from last year, and you look at his scoring in, a standard league, I think he put up about 50 points more than the second best player, who was Joe Burrow or Josh Allen, depending how your league kind of, scored things, but they were very similar in points. So you're looking at that kind of thing of like Lamar Jackson is so good that basically whoever's drafting him first is probably running away every week with their tie. Even if you were to take Derrick Henry, say, who's one of the top running backs, or Saquon Barkley, you just are not making up that difference to the guy that has Lamar Jackson. So PPR and half PPR is just there to kind of just squeeze things up and make it a bit more interesting and add some more tactics.
Yeah. You can have added spikes, because sometimes you can do things like add a point for a first down, which I love. Every league, every anybody who's listening to this who runs a fantasy league, get into your scoring and add points for first downs. They are one of the most important things in football. They should be rewarded. Now, there's another bit, Stu, you can maybe tell us about this as well. You do get specialist variations on this, and there's lots and lots of ways you can tweak it, but one of the more common ones, and if you're entering your first fantasy league, you might find yourself in a league that says at the top that it is a PPR league, so all of your receivers are getting a point per reception, but then it's also a TEP league. Stuart?
Yeah, that's,
what does that mean?
That's tight end premium. I've actually been seeing this more and more in like newer leagues or in redraft leagues as they start up. A lot of people seem to be buying into this. So tight end premium is where they would be given basically a further multiplier. Like usually it's an extra point per reception. So for tight ends only. So that's a position class that, they also receive the ball a lot, but a lot of the times they're used as blockers and additional linemen, like at the end of the offensive line, and also blockers and running plays too. But yeah, like so you end up with, when you look at tight ends, because they are a little bit rarer, that's one of these position groups where they don't generally in standard scoring and PPR and half PPR, unless you have one of the top few guys, you're probably only getting maybe like 5 to 8 points a week out of your tight end. So this was to kind of try and level the tight ends up to be more in line with some traditional wide receivers or maybe even the running back class.
Hell yeah. And that is it. And it is. It's all about, this is what you find with lots of your scoring systems. The idea should be that as many players as possible, as many position groups, I'm going to talk about the position groups you'll have in your league in right now, as many position groups as possible stand the same chance of running up the same number of points or a similar number of points. Because at the end of the day, if the only person who can score points is the quarterback, then you only want to draft a quarterback in your fantasy league, and if you miss out on that one position, it's going to be a very boring year for you. Whereas if you've got wide receivers who can put up the same points, if you've got running backs, tight ends, all of a sudden, it's a lot more to play for, and it's a lot more interesting. Now, talking about rosters and positional value, because this is where everybody should get like little snippets of mine and Stu's WhatsApp chats, but it's just Stu ranting about positional value. So, your standard...
Especially about tight end
positional value. Your standard fantasy roster, it'll vary slightly depending on your league, in particular on how many people are in your league. Now, a standard fantasy league is 12 players. Now, but that can go all the way down to 8, and it can go all the way up to, I'm in a mega mad league this year where there's 32 of us. But that's pretty weird. 12 is normally where you're at. And if you've got a 12-team league, what you could expect to have to start every single week is normally a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex. Now, all flex means is that can be a wide receiver, a running back, or a tight end. You get to pick a kicker and a defense. Now, defense, we'll talk a wee bit about one bit of defense very briefly later, but defense, you pick the whole team. You don't pick a player. You pick like the Eagles. You pick the whole team's defense. Now, what this means is when you're drafting...
That's your strength.
Yeah, so what I mean, when you're drafting, you need to think about where you're focusing your efforts and how many good players you can get for each position. Now, standard 12-team league, that means that across your league, there's going to be 12 quarterbacks being played every week. There's going to be 12 tight ends being played every week, 12 DSTs, 12 kickers. Mm-hmm. So that's, you need to think about the 32-team league that is the NFL, and there's 12 of those guys getting played every single week in your league. But that means everyone can have a starter. You know, I mean, you're not going to be forced to pick up a backup QB and pray that someone gets hurt. But running backs, wide receivers, it gets a little more complicated. You could have at least 24 and up to 36 of these guys, depending on how your league's set up, starting every single week in your fantasy league. And that means you need to think these are the guys that have got value. When you're thinking about your draft, and we're going to talk a wee bit about draft strategy briefly in a minute, when you're thinking about the types of players you want to get early, you're going to need to start more wide receivers and running backs. So as a rule, they're the guys you want to get first, because the top ones really make a huge, huge difference. And it is a massive difference. And you need to think about, right, which of these guys that are going to, and Stu, this is when you can bounce in about positional value. Yeah. What are the guys that are going to give me that advantage over my league opponent in any given week in a wide receiver, a running back, a tight end?
Yeah, I would say especially just talking about, again, I realise I'm stressing tight end a little bit here, but
tight ends.
I've been kind of looking at mock drafts and I'm seeing how early Bowers and McBride are going this year. So that's Brock Bowers, plays for the Vegas Raiders. Last year had an absolutely phenomenal year as a rookie, and now this year Geno Smith has moved there, so they have basically an at least league average quarterback playing with them this year. So in theory, he should do pretty well. And the fact that the guy puts up wide receiver numbers already, because I think he was 1,700 yards last year,
up that way. Like that.
Yeah, he was kind of pretty. We can look up.
He was up that way. You talk and I'll check it.
But yeah, so anyway, if you're looking at positional value and you're looking early and you're going, okay, quarterback, yeah, they put up the most points. Your main thing is for me, I always look at it and go, okay, when I am drafting, do I have the opportunity to draft Josh Allen? If you're not in the first few picks, you probably don't. So, if you're later in that first round, so you can probably just say, okay, unless he falls to me, I'm not going to get a chance at taking him. So now, do I take wide receiver or do I take running back? Which one of these is most likely to get me most points in a week? Or tight end, say, and that's when you're looking at your Brock Bowers. The whole drop-off with quarterback, once you're beyond your Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, maybe Burrow tier, Jalen Hurts, Daniels, like those guys, once you go below that tier, there's really quite a narrow gap between QB6 and QB16. So if you can wait past those and keep taking wide receivers and running backs early in your draft, if you've not had a shot at taking Jalen Hurts or Lamar or whoever, you may as well wait and take Bo Nix or take Dak Prescott because the guy's not injured this year and he's been a top 5.
Allegedly.
So anyway, point is that for me, I look at that positional value and I like to think I'm going to be going WR or tight end, wide receiver or tight end, and possibly running back. But we'll get into that draft tactics and what they're called later on.
Now, one just for the sake of completeness, Brock Bowers last year put up 1,194 yards, which for a tight end is ludicrous. It's absolutely insane. But anyway, so your last bit then when you think about your rosters, one bit that's, let's say, different positions have got different values. There is one setting, though, that when you enter your fantasy league, you need to watch out for, because if this one setting is on, it totally changes the value of players. And that is, bum, Superflex. It's a great name. Superflex. What that means is that in that flex spot I talked about earlier, where most of the time a flex is a wide receiver, a running back, or a tight end, now you can slot a quarterback in as well. What that means is that you are more or less every single week going to want to have 2 top, or as close to top as you can have, quarterbacks in your team. And if you don't have a super flex spot, you might find you only have 1 quarterback in your whole team. You don't even put one on your bench. You don't even have a spare sitting about in case someone gets hurt. Because, like we said earlier, 32 starting quarterbacks in the league. Yes, okay, they're not all the same, but there is 32 starters, and you've only got 12 guys in your league. If you can play 2, all of a sudden there's now 24 potential quarterbacks starting. That's when it gets interesting.
Also, Brian, just before we go there, I will also point out, just going back to what I was saying there in terms of tiers of players or the scoring. Yes, there's not a huge drop-off between 6 and 12 or 6 and 16 some years, in terms of the scoring for quarterbacks. But when you start dropping down to the 19th best quarterback in the league to the 25th and then the 25th to the 32nd, there's a huge difference in the amount of points per week. So if you're in a
I'm going to be rude and I'm going to stomp all over, Stu, because we're going to talk about tiers in a minute, because it really does matter, and it is the bit that you're leaning into. Now, The last bit, and this is going to close out talking about rosters. There is a final setting that some leagues have, and if this is your introduction to fantasy football, you hopefully won't see this, because it's where you turn into a real GM, and you have something called IDP. Now, we said earlier, you will start a team defence. Many, many leagues start defence, and it's the whole team you start. And you just do the total number of sacks, the total number of interceptions, and blah, blah, blah. There is a last setting you have, and me and Stu do love this setting very dearly, where you don't do that. Or, in addition to doing that, you start individual defensive players, IDP. So you'll start a couple of D linemen. Myles Garrett, I love him so much. You'll start a couple of defensive backs. You'll start a couple of linebackers. This is something, and this is the start and the end of this, and Stu's raging because he loves talking about IDP, because it's not something you should really expect to see in a maybe a more beginner-friendly league. But it is something, again, that if you do find yourself in a league with that, the only advice I'm going to give you is check your scoring, because the scoring settings you have, these guys can be valuable. But we're going to move on. It's draft day! And with the first pick of your fantasy draft, you select a draft structure. And it's about, we talked earlier about this idea that you're all going to have, in your league, you're all going to have a set of players, and they will not repeat. You aren't going to be sharing players with anybody. So how are you choosing? Now, in terms of the literal order you're going to go in, many leagues have many ways of deciding who goes first. Some leagues, they do it, if it's a long-running league, they'll do it like the NFL, and it'll be the winner of the league before gets the draft last, and the person who came last gets the draft first. Some leagues do combines, and they all go and they meet up, and they go and they make 40-plus-year-old men try and do the 40-yard dash, and they all blow their hamstrings. And there's fabulous clips on TikTok.
Brian, that's like one of my favourite things. Yeah, like that's one of my favourite things is round about draft season, where you see the amount of people that are injuring themselves.
The videos.
It's important to stay fit, because you never know when you're going to run in a draft combine.
So it's also that fantastic bit where you see like those guys who sit watching the real NFL combine, in an armchair. I could do that. Well, let's see. Because sadly, by the time you've hit the end of that crate of bud, I don't really think you can. But it's very funny to record. So you'll pick your draft order in whatever way you do, and then the draft structure that most leagues use is something that's called a snake.
Yeah.
And what that means is that you'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yes, officer, I am sober. So you go back the way you came. Now, the reason that you do this is to make sure the person who got the first pick doesn't have a ridiculous advantage. Because the NFL draft, the real draft, you can have that because it's a real league, and that's the point of the NFL draft. In fantasy, if you had it like the NFL draft, when the person with the first overall pick goes first in every round, their team would become so strong that no one would be able to compete, more than likely.
Yeah.
So you do it as a snake.
Yeah, Brian, I was going to say we will put the asterisk there that for your dynasty league, for rookie drafts, that's the one place where it's different, where you typically will literally just run your draft the same as the NFL one, and it may only be like 3 or 4 rounds, and it will be worst team picks first, and they're picking first every round. I think, but in a redraft, you don't really want to do that kind of thing, because you're just going to end up.
And that is again, it's the one where, God damn it, it's why I love Dynasty so much. It's closer to being like an actual GM. But it is, and it's because it runs year after year after year. So you can do that, and it means that somebody doesn't become a ridiculous runaway winner. Now, something that we have been bad podcast hosts do, because we've talked about things before we explain them. Now, something that we have talked about when you're thinking about drafting, we've made a lot of references to things like tiers so far. And this is one of my biggest... Do you know, the more I get into... This is when I started to win at fantasy, is when I started to think less about rankings and more about tiers. Now, for everybody listening, you can dive on to whatever your fantasy football platform is. There's dozens of them out there. There's Sleeper, there's ESPN, there's Yahoo, there's whatever. And you can go in there and you can find everybody arranged by something that's called ADP. Now, what that stands for is average draft position. What that means is that your platform keeps an eye on every single draft that's ran on it, and it'll tell you, on average, this player gets taken this number of picks into the draft. So, for example, this year, Jamar Chase has got an ADP of 1.2. Now, what that means is that he is taken, on average, as the player 1.2. So, sometimes he's taken second, but he's taken first. Now, that's a really useful bit of information, because it means you can say, right, where do most people think these guys land? But that's then when something that Stu mentioned earlier, the difference between wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 3. So, for the sake of this, that would be Jamar Chase to CeeDee Lamb. It's wide receiver 1 to 3. It's not that big. You could realistically, over the course of a year, you could expect any of those guys to finish as the best wide receiver in the league in terms of fantasy. The difference between wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 6 gets bigger. And to 9, and to 12, and to so on, you get big, big steps. And this is what people then call tiers. Now, there's a million ways to label your tiers. A, B, C, D, whatever. Elite, good, very good, standard. The point is that when you're thinking about your draft, sometimes you might have just seen 5 wide receivers walk off the board, all in a row. And you might think, right, okay, so wide receiver 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 have all gone. So I could take wide receiver 6. Or you could take running back 1. And that might represent a huge difference, because that running back, that tight end, that quarterback, the tier that they're in might be so much higher than the tier you've been pushed to with that position group that you were targeting. This sounds really funky, and there's loads of stuff to it. And so I'm going to let you bounce in a minute.
I was going to say, this is one of these hard things, or one of these things that's difficult to explain without actually showing people do it. But I think you covered it pretty well though. Like, about, it's just that kind of thing of really just kind of looking at what you need for your team within the tiers and deciding when to jump. Like, if there is what Ryan just described with the wide receivers, we went, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they were all taken in a row from the wide receivers. You call that a run. Like, if there's been a run on receivers, like everybody's ran to the shop, they're grabbing all the toilet paper, there's no toilet paper.
Not quoted again.
And all of a sudden you're looking, so when you're in the supermarket and you're looking at all the Charmin's gone, all the Charmin Ultra's gone, okay, cool, we do have Tesco's own brand toilet paper there. Or, like, well, you know what, I also need eggs. And in the egg aisle, you're like, well, nobody's touching the eggs yet. And I can see that there's the primo best organic eggs that are available to me here. So do I want the worst toilet paper in the world? Or can I go for these premium eggs? So you spend your money on the eggs instead. That's the way I would describe things.
There is no part of me, for everybody listening, there is absolutely no part of me that thought we would be talking about Tesco value toilet paper and premium organic eggs as part of this point. But the point does stand. So that's kind of your general overview to your draft. It's this idea, you need to get these players. You have hopefully got in your head an idea of how you kind of tier them, who you think's got the most value to them, and you pick them up. Then, and this is something where there's lots of different ways of doing this. We're only going to mention a couple of them in this pod just to get everyone started. What is your draft strategy going to be? Now, there are 2 strategies that we're going to talk about in this pod, and then there's one just final consideration that we chuck in. Now, one of the big ones is something that's called zero or hero RB. So it's zero or hero running back. And it's one of the things, running backs are a really tricky position in fantasy football. It is the highest contact position in the sport. Okay, linemen will get upset with me, but you guys don't count for fantasy. Outside linemen is the highest contact position in the sport. So they're really, really prone to injury. These guys get hurt a lot, just the nature of the game. But in fantasy, they can score you so many points. They're so, so valuable. So do you gamble and go early on someone like, dare I say it, Saquon, and go for a hero RB? Someone who, if he's good, you're in the playoffs. If Saquon does Saquon things, you've done some very special things with the rest of your draft to not make the playoffs. He is a hero. But if he gets hurt, your whole year might be done, because that was the big piece you built your team around. Or do you go, as Stu sits and nods vigorously, 0 RB? What that means is you say, do you know what, I'm not going to gamble on one of these guys that it costs me so much in my draft. It costs me my big pick, my first pick, to get him. Instead, I'm going to take other players who, they might not score the same total points over the year, but they'll be close. And they stand a lower chance of getting hurt. Players like wide receivers. Your top wide receivers, for example. You know, the Chases, the Jeffersons, the Lambs of this one. And then I'm going to wait until later in my draft. Then I'll pick up some running backs. So yes, okay, they might not be as shiny as Saquon and Gibbs. But my God, like, Chuba's got value, Stu. We love Chuba.
Well, yeah, local boy to me here in Edmonton, and as I've told you many times in the past, Brian, his family lives just literally 10 minutes that ways from where my house is, kind of thing. But yeah, he's, just speaking of him specifically, though, he has actually moved so far up the ADP now that you no longer can get him in the old 10th and 11th rounds, where I used to love sniping him late in drafts and then just make hay, because he might not be a top running back, but he was still putting up like decent points every week. So he was reliable. You would get 15 to 20 points, I think, and you would have him in there.
Right. Yeah, and that is it. That's the whole idea of 0 RB. He's somebody that you can pick somebody up that's reliable. He's not going to have the glam. He's not going to drop a 50 burger. Is a wee bit of fantasy jargon. 50 points in a week goes, but he'll be reliable.
Yeah.
Right.
I will say, or just one thing on that, Brian, just on tactics. With those running backs, if you are aiming for guys in later rounds, I traditionally prefer aiming at, rather than guys that are backups on teams who aren't starters, I kind of like to look for guys who are likely to be starters on teams, so at least you know they're going to get carries, so they're going to get yards. So sure, they might not be Christian McCaffrey, they might not be Gibbs, like Jahmyr Gibbs or whoever, who is going to put up 30 points a week if they're healthy, but they'll get you those 15 to 20 points every time, and you're like, hey, it's easy points that are going to fill out your flex role. But
yeah. Now, there's a last bit, and I've made a bit of reference to this, so we'll deal with it quickly. There's a last tactic that a lot of people do like, that you might want to think about in your first draft, and it's this idea of, do you know what? There's 12 teams in this league. There's 32 quarterbacks. Stuff the quarterback. I'm just going to accept I'm not taking one, and I will just pick one up every week from my, and we'll talk about this in 2 seconds, my waiver wire, my group of players who weren't drafted. This is called streaming, and it's this idea that there are some position groups out there that there are just more players available than your league will start. And those are traditionally quarterback, tight end, kicker, and defense. And there's lots and lots of people out there who, rather than spending a high draft pick trying to get someone like Josh Allen, they will say, do you know what? I'm just going to accept that I am taking the 12th best quarterback in the league. And I'll deal with that because I'll have great players in other places. Now, moving on to the last segment of our show today. You have drafted your team of champions. They are in your stable. They are ready to roll out and defeat all who stand before them. Now what? Surely at this point you just sit there and revel in the glory that is about to come your way. No, it is not. There are a couple of things that every week when you're playing your league you need to keep an eye on. And there are things that make fantasy so much fun. One, set your lineup. Make sure you check.
Do not be that person in your league who consistently misses setting their lineup, leaves injured players in, forgets about bye weeks, because, my goodness, there is nothing more frustrating when you watch a team, especially towards the end of the year, if you're in a dogfight to make the playoffs, and there's another guy or lady kind of thing that is also in the running, and they're playing against someone who's not set their lineup, and they walk in whilst you've worked your bum off trying to pick up guys from the waiver to patch up your horribly injured team, and you go, it was all for nothing because that person just didn't bother setting the lineup and allowed that other person to walk in. Do not do it. Don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy. So make sure you set it, and you keep an eye on things throughout the season. A couple of things that, injuries are injuries, and you need to keep your eye on them. But one of the things that does catch a lot of new players out the international series. Watch out for when your team is actually playing. When is the team your players are on playing? So if they're in London, those kickoffs are way earlier on your Sunday than they would be normally. So keep an eye out for that. And make sure, a great tip for when you're playing is if you've got a player that is going to start earlier. So let's say he's in Thursday night football, or he's in a London game and he's kicking off really early in the day. You normally, if he's, let's say he's a wide receiver, you want him in a wide receiver slot on your team, not your flex. Because that then means if someone gets hurt on Saturday or something else, they get an early pre-game injury and they're in your flex spot, you've got more players you could replace them with. It just gives you options. Now, we've actually talked about waivers a wee bit so far, and we are drawn towards the end of the episode, but a very quick bit on waivers. What they are is your chance every single week to change some of the players who are on your team. Like we said, you're in a 12-team league, it's pretty likely there's only 12 quarterbacks that got drafted. So that means there is another 20 quarterbacks out there not on a team. So let's say that you've got Lamar Jackson and he gets hurt. He goes down. He gets a tummy bug. He has to run to the bathroom again.
Yeah.
So you might go and look at the waiver wire and say, what quarterbacks are still out there? And you can then add them onto your team. Now, waivers are weird and tricky, and there's lots of different ways of doing it. There's two that we'll talk about. The traditional way, the right way. Anyone who does the second one is bad and wrong. As I put my colours to the mast quickly. It's just reverse league standings. If you are the sucky worst player in your league, you get first choice of the draft rejects that no one wants. But you get first choice. And while I'm saying draft rejects, and I'm being a bit silly, weeks 1 and 2 of your league, my God, that's when players like Bubba-da-Bum, Kyron Williams appear, and no one's seen him coming. Or Puka Nacua, who appeared, and no one's seen him coming. And my God, if you got him, that turned your whole year around, because they turned into huge superstars. So it's worth keeping an eye open for that. The second one, this is what you know what to do. I'm going to shamelessly fob this off on you because I hate it. Fab. Going to tell us all what Fab is for waivers.
Yeah.
And then one last bit, we're going to wrap up.
For really bad podcast purposes here, we're both in agreement about Fab.
I know. This makes there's no drama.
We both dislike it. There's no drama here where one of us will defend it. I understand the use for it, and I do sort of, I see the fact that it adds an interesting aspect to the waivers. So what Fab is FAAB, which stands for Free Agent Acquisition Budget. And that's where, like, every team at the start of the season will be given a dollar amount, like fictional dollars. It can be anything. It's typically $100. And then what you do is each week when you're making your waiver claim, you can put any value on a player that you're bidding for from $0 to $100. You could waste your whole pot on one player. And in the examples Brian gave earlier, like a couple of years when Puka Nacua first appeared in the league, after that first week, you would put $100. Every team should put $100 in. If you want a wide receiver, like, just blow your entire budget on him, because that guy's going to be worth it, even if you don't get another, player or high-ranked player in waivers for the rest of the season. Essentially what it does as well, though, is it circumvents that reverse order waiver thing, where when you're bidding, it's the highest bidder will get access to the player. But like I say, you've only got that $100 budget for the entire year. So if you've spent it in your first week, you then can no longer bid on players. That doesn't mean that you'll get no players, though, because I have in the past paid for players.
You can bid $0.
You can bid $0, and if you're just trying to pick up like a backup QB or something like that for your bye week, and you're, let's say like, let's just go for Bryce Young when he wasn't playing very well, because I just need someone to throw in there, you're probably still going to get him, I think. So you're not out of the game by not having any budget, but I don't like it. I prefer the traditional method of reverse order and that.
Just boo. Sorry. Yeah. I know there's people out there that love Fab, and I'm happy you have a bit of the game that you like, but I hate it so much. Right, okay. That's going to bring us to the final section of our episode tonight, and it is a final section because this could be, this couldn't even be one podcast. This could be a whole season of podcasts every single year, and it's the idea of trades. Now, trades are one of the best things in fantasy. You get to try to convince your league mates that some of your players are incredible, they're about to break out, they're about to be the best thing ever, and they should give you one of their players who's really not worth that much, and you're doing them a favour by offering the trade. It is some now. The only things we're really going to say with trades, there's two things that, particularly as a new player, that you should think about. One, when you should only ever make a trade that makes sense for your team. It adds something to your team to make them better. Two, the idea of I am going to offer you 5 backup level players for your one stud, but it's 5 for 1, so sure, it's not balanced. Losing the one stud is way worse than gaining the 5 other players. You can only play so many players in a position anyway. Generally speaking, and every league is different, and every team is different, and it's why we're not going to spend a whole hour talking about trades. Generally speaking, giving away your best player is a bad trade. If you've got Josh Allen on your team and no one else of note, trading away Josh Allen to pick up a couple of bits isn't the best move you could have made. But every league is different and every team is different, so there is always reasons that you sometimes do them. And everybody should trade me their best players because, of course, they should. As I say, trades is something that's a whole other thing. And do you know what? Something that you can actually get in touch with is on Insta, and you can get in touch with us in the socials. What is the best trade that you've ever been sent? Particularly people who have been playing fantasy for a while. What's the best one you've got away with, and what's the funniest one you've been offered? Because my word, it's one of the nicest things about fantasy is some of the incredible trade offers that you can receive.
Well, Brian, I was going to say, like, one thing that really adds to an NFL, basically camaraderie and the group joy is when you name and shame people for poor offers. So that's one of the favourite things I love in NFL group chats, when you see some of those offers that people have made and you can just all shame the person and say, why would you even offer that? Like, it's not even close. So. And I get that everyone needs to start on negotiations. That's what you always hear. Like, that was the start point. I prefer to cut straight to the chase and just say, okay, here's what I want from you. Here's what I'm willing to offer.
Where are we?
And go from there.
Right. Yeah. Trades are fun. Trades are one of the best things about fantasy. Right, okay, with that, I am going to wrap up. So, thank you everyone for listening. I hope that this has been informative. I hope that you now feel that you're in a spot that you know a little bit more about fantasy football than you did before you started listening. I certainly know for me, this is the kind of thing that I wish I had when I started, because there's just so much in it. And fantasy is such a fantastic activity, a fantastic hobby, that getting your feet in the ground and getting running is one of the best things that you can really do. Now, we are not done with Fantasy Football School. These lessons are not over. There is going to be, we've got another episode in the works that's going to be coming out really, really soon, and we are going to be walking you through who are the studs, the staples, and the sleepers for every major offensive position group. Who should you be targeting in your draft? And who do you want to walk away with if you want to walk away with that fantasy championship? Thank you so much for listening, everybody, tonight. Stu, thank you so much for being on with me today, mate.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on, Brian. It was great fun kind of reliving some of my draft memories and things there, just and talking about everything NFL fantasy.
Hell yeah. And thank you very much again, everybody, for listening. I have been Brian. This has been the Tartan Touchdown. Make sure you catch up with us in the next episode. And until then, I'll see you later.